The boy hadn't moved in 3 hours, not even a twitch. Doctor, Victoria Chen pressed her face against the cold glass of the rehabilitation center's observation window, watching her 15-year-old son Marcus stare blankly at the ceiling from his wheelchair. The same empty expression he'd worn for 18 months. The same hollow eyes that once sparkled with genius, now reflecting nothing but defeat. 47 specialists. 47 different ways to hear the word impossible. And today, she would hear it again. Victoria's phone buzzed with the message she'd been dreading. Test results confirm complete neural pathway destruction. No electrical activity detected below injury site. Treatment recommendations, palliative care, and psychological support. Dr. Phillips. She closed her eyes, feeling the weight of her $12 billion pharmaceutical empire pressing down on her shoulders. All that power, all that money, all those breakthrough treatments that had saved thousands of, quote, lives, and none of it could save the one life that mattered most. But at that exact moment, something impossible happened. From somewhere behind her came the soft sound of footsteps in the empty corridor. Footsteps that shouldn't exist, because the building's cleaning crew wasn't scheduled for another hour. Victoria turned to see a man in a gray janitor's uniform moving quietly past the observation window, pushing a cart filled with cleaning supplies. He stopped. The janitor stood motionless outside Marcus's room, staring through the doorway with an expression Victoria had never seen before. Not pity, not sympathy, something else entirely. Recognition, as if he was seeing something in her broken son that 47 medical experts had missed. The janitor set down his mop, walked to Marcus's wheelchair, and knelt beside it. Victoria's breath caught as she watched him lean close to her son's ear and whisper a single word. Too quiet for her to hear through the glass. But whatever he said made Marcus's head turn for the first time in weeks. Marcus looked directly at the stranger's face, and for one impossible moment, Victoria saw something flicker in her son's eyes. Hope. But then, security alarms began blaring throughout the building, red lights flashing in the corridors, and Victoria realized that this janitor, this man who had somehow reached her unreachable son, was about to be arrested for unauthorized contact with a patient. She had less than 60 seconds to decide whether to let them take him away or to trust a complete stranger who might be the only person capable of giving her son a reason to live again. The choice would change everything. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you, because sometimes the word that changes everything isn't spoken by a doctor or a scientist. Sometimes it comes from the most unexpected person, in the most impossible moment, when hope seems completely lost. And sometimes that single whispered word is enough to bring the dead back to life. Victoria Chen was about to discover that miracles don't always happen in operating rooms or research laboratories. Sometimes they happen in quiet corridors, whispered by strangers who refuse to accept that impossible means forever. But first, she had to choose. Trust the system that had failed her son 47 times, or trust the janitor who had just done what no expert could do. The alarms grew louder. Security was coming. Her son was looking at the stranger with more life in his eyes than she'd seen since the accident. And Victoria Chen, the woman who controlled a pharmaceutical empire built on the promise that science could cure anything, was about to learn that the most powerful medicine in the world couldn't be manufactured in a laboratory. It could only be shared between two people who understood the same kind of pain. The November rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows of Neurodyne Industries' 42nd floor, each drop like a bullet against the glass. Doctor, Victoria Chen stood motionless in her corner office, staring down at the city of Seattle, spread below her like a circuit board of lights and shadows. At 38, she was the youngest pharmaceutical CEO in the Fortune 500. A woman who had built a $12 billion empire on the promise that science could cure anything. But science had failed her son. The intercom buzzed. "Dr. Chen, the board meeting starts in 10 minutes. Victoria didn't move. "Cancel it." "Ma'am?" "Cancel the meeting, Sarah. Reschedule everything for tomorrow." She pressed her forehead against the cold glass. Today marked exactly 18 months since the accident. 18 months since her world had collapsed in the span of 3 seconds on a rain-slicked highway. 18 months since her 15-year-old son Marcus had been pulled from the wreckage of their Mercedes, his spine severed at the T6 vertebra, his legs forever silent. 47 medical consultations, 47 different specialists, 47 ways to hear the same crushing truth. Complete paralysis, permanent damage, no hope of recovery. Victoria Chen, the woman who had revolutionized pain management and neural regeneration therapy, could not save her own child. The Seattle Children's Hospital Physical Therapy Wing buzzed with quiet determination at 7 in the morning. Wheelchairs moved through corridors like synchronized dancers, each one carrying a story of resilience and hope. Doctor, Victoria Chen stood outside the main therapy room, watching through the observation window as her son Marcus completed his daily exercises. At 15, Marcus had inherited his mother's sharp intellect and his late father's gentle nature. Before the accident, he'd been captain of his school's debate team, a gifted pianist, and had been accepted to MIT's early admission program. Now, he mechanically moved through range of motion exercises, his face blank, his eyes focused on nothing. "He's stronger than the reports indicate," a voice said behind her. Victoria turned. David Santos stood beside her, wearing khakis and a button-down shirt instead of his janitor's uniform. In the harsh hospital lighting, she could see the exhaustion etched around his eyes, the way his hands trembled slightly from too much coffee and too little sleep. "You came." "I said I would." He studied Marcus through the window. "How long has he been this withdrawn?" "Months." "Andomana? "Months. He talks to his therapists, answers questions when asked, but he's given up." They watched as Marcus transferred from his wheelchair to the parallel bars, his upper body strength impressive even 18 months post-injury, but his movements were robotic, efficient without emotion. "Where's Elena?" Victoria asked. "In the children's wing." She insisted on wearing her best dress to meet you. David smiled slightly. "She thinks you might be able to help her walk again, even though I told her this was just a consultation." Victoria felt her chest tighten. "David, you understand the risks if this doesn't work? For both of them? I understand that doing nothing is also a risk." David pointed through the window. "Look at Marcus. He's not living. He's just existing. Elena is heading down the same path. Her last report card showed failing grades for the first time in her life. She used to love school." Victoria watched her son complete his exercise routine with mechanical precision. "The therapist says Marcus has the physical capability to achieve significant independence, but he has no motivation. Because he can't see a future worth working toward." A young girl's laughter echoed from down the hallway, bright and musical. Both adults turned toward the sound. "That's Elena," David said, his entire face transforming. "She's early." Elena Santos came around the corner in a bright yellow wheelchair, her dark hair in carefully braided pigtails, her smile radiant despite the medical bracelet around her thin wrist. She looked younger than 11, small for her age due to the effects of chemotherapy. But her eyes sparkled with intelligence and curiosity. "Papa!" She wheeled herself toward them with practiced efficiency. "Is this Dr. Chen?" Victoria knelt down to Elena's eye level, surprised by the immediate warmth in the child's face. "Hello, Elena. Your father told me you want to be a marine biologist." "I do. I want to study dolphin communication patterns and their use of echolocation for navigation." Elena's words tumbled out in an excited rush. "Did you know dolphins can recognize themselves in mirrors? It means they have self-awareness, just like humans." Victoria glanced at David, who was watching his daughter with unconcealed love and pride. "That's fascinating. What made you interested in dolphins specifically?" Elena's smile dimmed slightly. "I used to swim before I got sick. My mom said I moved through water like a dolphin." She looked down at her hands. "I miss swimming more than walking." The simple honesty of the statement hit Victoria harder than any medical report could have. "Elena, would you like to meet my son Marcus? He's about your age." "He's paralyzed too, right?" Elena asked with startling directness. "Papa told me." "Yes. Is he sad about it?" Victoria hesitated. "Very sad." Elena nodded seriously. "I get sad sometimes too. But then I remember that dolphins don't need legs to be amazing." She looked up at Victoria. "Maybe Marcus just needs to remember what makes him amazing." David squeezed his daughter's shoulder. "Dr. Chen, Elena has something she wants to show Marcus." Elena reached into a small backpack attached to her wheelchair and pulled out a tablet. "I've been working on a project about adaptive technologies. Look." She swiped through a presentation that was remarkably sophisticated for an 11-year-old. Underwater cameras designed for wheelchair users. Computer interfaces controlled by eye movement. Even a theoretical design for a wheelchair that could function underwater. "Elena, did you create all of this yourself?" Victoria asked, amazed. "I have a lot of time to think," Elena said simply. "And I want to prove that being paralyzed doesn't mean you can't explore the ocean." Through the observation window, Marcus had finished his exercises and was transferring back to his wheelchair. He moved with practiced efficiency but no joy, no sense of accomplishment. "Elena," Victoria said carefully, "Marcus might not be very talkative at first. He's been struggling with his situation." "That's okay. Sometimes I don't feel like talking either." Elena closed her tablet. "Can we go meet him now?" Victoria led them into the therapy room. Marcus looked up as they approached, his expression guarded but curious. "Marcus, I'd like you to meet some friends of mine. This is Mr. Santos and his daughter Elena." Marcus nodded politely but said nothing. Elena wheeled herself directly up to him, studying his wheelchair with obvious interest. "That's a nice chair. Is it custom?" Marcus blinked, clearly not expecting a technical question. "It's a Quickie GP. Titanium frame." "Titanium? That must be super lightweight." Elena's eyes lit up. "I have an aluminum frame, but I've been researching titanium. Does it make a big difference in acceleration?" Despite himself, Marcus looked more engaged. "Yeah. It's faster. Better for basketball if I ever." He stopped, his face closing off again. "If you ever want to try wheelchair basketball," Elena finished. "My friend Jake plays. He says the chairs they use are like race cars." Marcus stared at her. "You know someone who plays wheelchair basketball?" "Jake, and Maria who plays tennis. And this really cool guy named Robert who does rock climbing." Elena spoke as if these were the most normal things in the world. Being in a wheelchair doesn't mean you can't be an athlete. David watched the exchange with careful attention. In the months since Elena's injury, she'd connected with other paralyzed children through online communities and support groups. But Marcus had been isolated, protected from other patients by Victoria's desire to shield him from additional pain. "Marcus," Elena continued, "want to see something cool I'm working on?" She pulled out her tablet again, but this time opened a different application. It's a virtual reality program that simulates underwater movement for people who can't swim traditionally. The screen showed a digital ocean environment where users could navigate using hand controls, experiencing the sensation of swimming with dolphins and exploring coral reefs. Marcus leaned closer, despite himself. "You programmed this?" "Most of it. My friend helped with the 3D modeling." Elena demonstrated the controls. "See? You use these hand sensors to move through the water. It's not the same as real swimming. But it's something." Victoria watched her son's face transform. For the first time in months, he looked genuinely interested in something. "This is incredible," Marcus said quietly. "The physics simulation looks really accurate." "You know about physics simulations?" Elena asked excitedly. I used to want to study aerospace engineering." Marcus's voice was barely audible. "Before." "Why can't you still study it?" Elena asked, with the blunt honesty of a child. Marcus's face darkened. "Because, what's the point? I'll never be able to work in the field." "Never be able to." Stephen Hawking was paralyzed, and he revolutionized our understanding of space. Elena interrupted. "And there are tons of engineers who work with simulations and computer modeling. You don't need to walk to design rockets." Marcus stared at her, speechless. David stepped forward. "Marcus, would you be interested in seeing something Elena and I have been working on together?" Victoria looked at him sharply. "They hadn't discussed this." Elena grinned. "Should we show him the prototype, Papa?" "What prototype?" Victoria asked. David pulled out his phone and opened a video file. "Elena wanted to help with my research, so we've been working on a theoretical model together." The video showed a computer simulation of a spinal cord with a detailed neural bypass system. But this wasn't the rough diagram David had drawn in the lab. This was a sophisticated 3D model, with accurate anatomical details and functioning electrical pathways. "Elena created the visual interface," David explained, "and helped me work through some of the mathematical modeling for the electrical stimulation patterns." Victoria stared at the screen. "Elena, you understand neural pathway mapping?" "I learned about it when I was researching my own condition," Elena said, matter-of-factly. "I wanted to understand why my tumor affected some functions but not others. The nervous system is basically, or a computer network, right? Input, processing, output. When there's damage, you need to find a way to reroute the signals." Marcus was studying the simulation with intense focus. "The bypass connections, are these based on real neural tissue compatibility?" Elena suggested using induced pluripotent stem cells, David said. "Cells that could be programmed to create bridges between severed pathways." "That's..." Marcus paused, thinking, "That's actually brilliant? You're not trying to repair the damage, you're engineering a workaround." Elena beamed. "Exactly! Like when a computer program has a bug and you write new code to get around it, instead of trying to fix the original error." Victoria felt something she hadn't experienced in months. Her son was genuinely excited about something. But she also felt a stab of concern. "Elena, Marcus, I need you both to understand something important," she said carefully. "This research is very preliminary. There's no guarantee it would work, and, even if it did, the treatment would be experimental and risky." Elena's face grew serious. "Dr. Chen, I know you're trying to protect us from disappointment, but hoping for something better isn't the same as expecting it to happen." Marcus nodded slowly. "She's right, Mom. And even if this specific treatment doesn't work, At least someone is still trying to find answers. The simple statement hit Victoria like a revelation. All her attempts to shield Marcus from false hope had instead shielded him from any hope at all. "Marcus," she said quietly, "would you be interested in participating in the research? Not as a patient, but as a consultant?" Marcus's eyes widened. "What do you mean?" David stepped forward. "Your mother and I are developing a new treatment protocol. We need input from people who understand the reality of spinal cord injury, not just the medical theory." "You want our opinions?" Elena asked excitedly. "We want your partnership," Victoria said, surprising herself with the words. "Both of you have insights the research team needs." Marcus looked between his mother and Elena, something shifting in his expression. "If we helped with the research and the treatment worked, would we be candidates for it?" Victoria felt her breath catch. It was the first time in months that Marcus had expressed interest in his own recovery. "Potentially, yes," David said carefully. "But Marcus, Elena, this isn't a promise. It's an opportunity to contribute to research that might help people like you in the future. Even if it doesn't work for us, maybe it will work for other kids." "That's still pretty amazing, right?" Marcus looked down at their joined hands, two children connected by circumstance and now by purpose. "Yeah," he said quietly, "that would be amazing." Victoria felt tears stinging her eyes. For 18 months, she'd watched her son withdraw from the world. But in the span of one conversation with the 11-year-old girl who refused to see paralysis as the end of possibility, something in Marcus had awakened. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more emotional stories like this one. David's phone buzzed. He checked it and frowned. "That's Dr. Martinez. He wants to meet with us this afternoon about the research proposal." Victoria nodded. "Elena, Marcus, would you like to come with us? See the laboratory where the work would be done?" Elena's eyes went wide. "A real research lab? Like on TV?" "Better than TV," Marcus said, and Victoria realized it was the first time she'd heard enthusiasm in his voice since the accident. As they left the therapy room together, two parents and two children bound by love and loss, and the fragile possibility of hope, Victoria felt something she thought she'd lost forever. Not the certainty that everything would be fixed, but the belief that it was worth trying to fix it. And sometimes, that belief is enough to change the world. They walked through the hospital corridors, Elena chattering excitedly about the research, while Marcus asked detailed questions about neural pathway engineering. David and Victoria followed behind, two parents watching their children engage with life again. Victoria said quietly, "How do we make sure we don't break their hearts if this doesn't work?" David watched Elena explain something to Marcus with animated gestures. "We don't," he said simply. "But we make sure they know that trying was worth it. That their voices mattered. That someone believed they deserved a chance." Victoria nodded, understanding something fundamental about hope. It wasn't about guaranteeing success. It was about refusing to accept that failure was permanent. And as they headed toward Neurodyne's research facility, she realized that the word medical term or a scientific breakthrough. It was simply possible. Sometimes that's all it takes to save a life. 6 months later, the Neurodyne research facility hummed with an energy that had nothing to do with the expensive equipment lining its walls. Dr. Victoria Chen stood before a wall of monitors, displaying real-time neural activity data, her hands trembling slightly as she watched the culmination of everything they'd worked toward. Today was the day they would attempt the first human trial of the neural bypass procedure. "Vitals are stable, Doctor," Martinez called from his position at the monitoring station. Blood pressure, 120/80. Heart rate, 72. Oxygen saturation, 99%. On the surgical table lay Marcus Chen, 15 years old, wearing a hospital gown and a brave smile that didn't quite hide his fear. Beside the table, Elena Santos sat in her wheelchair, holding a tablet that displayed the procedure's progress in real time. She'd insisted on being present, claiming she needed to document everything for their research journal. "Marcus," Victoria said, leaning over her son, "you can still change your mind. We've learned so much from the preliminary research that—" "Mom!" Marcus reached up and took her hand. "We've been planning this for 6 months. Elena and I have run every simulation, checked every calculation. I trust you. I trust David. And I trust that even if this doesn't work, we'll have tried something no one else was brave enough to attempt." David Santos stood at the secondary monitoring station, no longer wearing a janitor's uniform but the sterile scrubs of a research team member. In 6 months, he'd completed intensive training in neural monitoring, earned certifications in biomedical engineering, and co-authored 3 research papers with Victoria. But none of that mattered as much as the fact that he'd become the closest thing to a father figure Marcus had known since his own father's death. "David," Marcus called out, "promise me, you'll take care of Elena if something goes wrong." "Marcus Chen," Elena said firmly, "nothing is going wrong. We've checked everything. 17 times. Besides, I don't need taking care of. I need a research partner who's going to help me design those underwater wheelchairs we've been planning." Victoria felt her throat tighten. Over the months, Marcus and Elena had become inseparable, spending hours together developing adaptive technologies and supporting each other through the physical and emotional challenges of their conditions. Their friendship had given both children something Victoria now realized was more important than any medical treatment: hope. Dr. Sarah Kim, the surgical team leader, entered the room carrying a sealed container. "The neural stem cells are ready. We have a 4-hour window from implantation to electrical activation." Victoria nodded. The procedure they were attempting had never been tried in humans. Using Marcus's own stem cells, they had grown a neural bridge designed to bypass his spinal cord injury and create new pathways between his brain and lower body. The theoretical framework was sound, but theory and reality were often very different things. "Dr. Chen? Doctor?" Kim said quietly. "I need to remind you that as Marcus's mother, you cannot be the primary surgeon for this procedure. Conflict of interest protocols." "I understand." Victoria stepped back from the table. "Dr. Kim will lead the surgical team. I'll monitor from the observation room." Marcus's grip on her hand tightened. "Mom, you've spent your whole career saving other people's children. Today, you get to save your own." Victoria kissed his forehead, tasting salt from her own tears. "You don't need saving, Marcus. You just need a chance." As the surgical team began their preparations, David joined Victoria in the observation room. Through the reinforced glass, they could see Elena positioning herself where Marcus could see her, her tablet ready to show him the real-time progress of the neural connections. "Second thoughts?" David asked quietly. Victoria watched the monitors displaying her son's brain activity. "Every second. You? Same." David's hands were pressed against the glass. "But then I look at them at Marcus, asking detailed questions about electrode placement, at Elena, explaining the neural mapping to the surgical residents like she's been doing this her whole life. And I remember why we started this. They've been braver than we have. They've been hope when we were just desperate." The intercom crackled. "Dr. Chen, Mr. Santos, we're beginning the procedure now." For the next 3 hours, Victoria and David watched as Dr. Kim's team carefully implanted the neural bypass system. Microscopic electrodes were positioned along Marcus's spine, connected to a biocompatible processor no larger than a pacemaker. The stem cell bridges were inserted with precision that required real-time neural monitoring and constant adjustment. Through it all, Elena kept up a steady stream of commentary, narrating each step for Marcus, and occasionally correcting the medical resident's explanations of the procedure. "The electrodes are now in position at the T6 level," she announced, reading from her tablet. "Neural activity shows optimal signal reception. Marcus, your brain is talking to the computer perfectly." Marcus, conscious but sedated, managed a weak smile. "Is it talking back?" "Oh, not yet. But it's listening really carefully." At hour 2, something went wrong. "We're seeing irregular neural firing patterns, Doctor," Martinez called out, alarm in his voice. "The implanted bridge isn't integrating properly with the existing tissue." Victoria's blood went cold. On the monitors, Marcus's neural activity showed chaotic spikes and drops instead of the steady patterns they needed. "Doctor," Kim's voice was tight with concentration. "Adjusting electrode positioning. Mr. Santos, can you check the computer modeling predictions?" David's fingers flew over his keyboard. "Running diagnostics on their theoretical framework. The model shows optimal placement, but..." He paused, staring at the screen. "Elena, pull up the adaptive learning protocol." Elena's hands moved quickly across her tablet. "The system is trying to establish connections, but it's getting conflicting signals. It doesn't know which pathways to prioritize." "Like a GPS system with too many route options," Marcus said weakly from the table. "Exactly," Elena replied. "David, what if we give it a clearer map?" Victoria pressed against the glass. "What are you thinking?" David turned to Dr. Kim. "Can you initiate a manual override on the electrical stimulation? Instead of letting the system search randomly for connections, we'll guide it step by step." "That would require conscious participation from Marcus, Doctor," Kim replied. "He'd have to actively try to move while we establish the pathways." "Marcus," Victoria called through the intercom, "are you strong enough to try?" Marcus's eyes found hers through the glass. "I've been trying to move my legs for 18 months, Mom. I'm not stopping now." For the next hour, they worked together, patient, doctors, and 2 children who refused to accept that impossible meant forever. Marcus concentrated on moving his legs, while David and Dr. Kim adjusted the electrical stimulation patterns in real time. Elena provided constant feedback, monitoring the neural activity and suggesting modifications to their approach. I think I felt something," Marcus whispered during one adjustment sequence. The room went silent, except for the steady beeping of monitors. "Try again," Dr. Kim said. "Same mental command, but stronger." Marcus closed his eyes, his face a mask of concentration. On the monitors, the neural activity suddenly organized itself into clear, purposeful patterns. And then it happened. Marcus's left toe moved. Not much, barely perceptible to anyone not watching closely, but it moved. Elena gasped. "Marcus, do it again!" Marcus concentrated harder. This time, his entire left foot shifted slightly. Victoria collapsed into a chair, overwhelmed by emotions she couldn't name. David grabbed her hand as they watched their children make history. Both feet now. "Doctor," Kim instructed, "just think about wiggling your toes." Marcus's face scrunched with effort, and both feet responded with small but unmistakable movement. The surgical team erupted in quiet celebration, but Elena held up her hand for silence. "Marcus, we're not done yet. Can you try to bend your knee?" It took several attempts, but gradually, Marcus achieved small movements in both legs. Nothing dramatic, Nothing that would let him walk out of the room, but undeniable proof that the neural bypass was working. "The computer is learning," David breathed, watching the real-time data. "It's creating new pathway maps based on Marcus's movement attempts." Dr. Kim began the process of closing the surgical site, leaving the implanted system active but protected. "Marcus, the next few weeks will be crucial. The neural bridges need time to fully integrate, and you'll need intensive physical therapy to train the new pathways. Elena and I have already designed a rehabilitation program," Marcus said, his voice stronger now. "We've been working on it for months." As the surgical team completed their work, Victoria and David remained in the observation room, watching their children plan the next phase of recovery with the kind of detailed enthusiasm they'd once reserved for video games and school projects. "It's working," Victoria said quietly. "I can't believe it's actually working." "It's working because of them," David replied, nodding toward Marcus and Elena. "We provided the technology, but they provided the determination." Dr. Kim emerged from the surgery suite, pulling off her gloves with tired satisfaction. "The procedure was successful. But Dr. Chen, you need to understand this is just the beginning. Marcus has regained some motor function, but it will take months of therapy to develop meaningful mobility." Victoria nodded. "And what's the prognosis for full recovery?" "Unknown. This is unprecedented. But based on today's results, I'm optimistic that Marcus will achieve significantly more function than anyone thought possible." Over the next 2 weeks, Marcus began the most intensive rehabilitation program of his life. But instead of the lonely, mechanical exercises he'd endured before, his therapy sessions were collaborative efforts. Elena worked alongside him, testing modifications to the neural stimulation patterns and documenting his progress in their shared research journal. David had taken a leave of absence from his maintenance position to work full-time with the research team, developing individualized treatment protocols for other patients. Victoria found herself spending more time in the rehabilitation center than in her CEO office, watching her son rediscover movement one small step at a time. "Dr. Chen," Marcus said one afternoon as he successfully lifted his legs 6 inches off the therapy table, "Elena has something she wants to ask you." Elena wheeled herself closer, her expression unusually serious. "Dr. Chen, I want to be the next patient for the neural bypass surgery." Victoria's heart clenched. "Elena, sweetheart, we need more time to analyze Marcus's results. The procedure is still experimental." "My tumor is growing back," Elena said quietly. "The doctors don't think I have very long before it causes more damage. If I'm going to try this treatment, it needs to be soon." David went pale. "Elena, we haven't discussed because you're trying to protect me, Papa, just like Dr. Chen was trying to protect Marcus." Elena's voice was gentle but determined. "But I've been part of this research from the beginning. I understand the risks, and I understand what I'm choosing." Victoria knelt beside Elena's wheelchair. "What do you want, Elena?" "Really want?" Elena was quiet for a long moment. "I want to swim with dolphins. Maybe not real ones, maybe just in that VR program Marcus and I designed. But I want to try." She looked up at Victoria with eyes that held far too much wisdom for an 11-year-old. "And I want other kids like us to have the same chance." Marcus reached out from the therapy table and took Elena's hand. "If Elena has the surgery, I'll help with her rehabilitation. We'll figure it out together." Victoria looked at David, seeing her own fear and hope reflected in his face. "The Research Review Board would need to approve Elena as a candidate," Victoria said carefully. "And we'd need to modify the procedure for her specific type of spinal injury." "How long would that take?" Elena asked. 6 weeks minimum for approval and preparation." Elena nodded seriously. That gives us time to optimize the treatment protocol based on Marcus's progress. 2 months later, Elena Santos underwent the neural bypass surgery with Marcus Chen serving as her patient advocate and research partner. The procedure was even more complex than Marcus's, requiring delicate navigation around Elena's tumor site and integration with neural pathways already damaged by chemotherapy. But it worked. Not perfectly, not immediately, but steadily and surely, Elena began to regain function in her legs. The first time she moved her toes, Marcus cried. The first time she stood with assistance, David cried. The first time she took 3 halting steps between parallel bars, everyone in the rehabilitation center cried. 6 months after Elena's surgery, Victoria received a call that would change everything again. Dr. Chen, this is Dr. Rebecca Martinez from Johns Hopkins. We've been following your neural bypass research, and we have 17 pediatric patients who might be candidates for the procedure. Similar calls came from medical centers across the country, then around the world. The success of Marcus and Elena's treatments had created a demand that Neurodyne couldn't meet alone. Victoria found herself facing a choice that would define the rest of her career. She could patent the neural bypass technology, maintain control of the research, and build a profitable treatment program for the wealthy families who could afford experimental procedures. Or she could do something unprecedented in the pharmaceutical industry. She said one evening as they watched Marcus and Elena work together in the rehabilitation pool, both children swimming with adaptive equipment they designed themselves, "I want to open source the neural bypass technology." David looked at her in surprise. "You want to give it away?" "I want to make sure every paralyzed child has access to it. Not just the ones whose parents can afford to pay." Victoria watched Elena execute a perfect underwater turn, her face glowing with joy. This technology exists because 2 children refused to accept that their conditions were permanent. It should belong to all children like them. The announcement that Neurodyne would release the neural bypass research into the public domain sent shockwaves through the medical and business communities. Victoria's board of directors threatened to remove her as CEO. Investors fled. Stock prices plummeted. But something else happened that Victoria hadn't expected. Medical centers around the world began collaborating on improvements to the technology. Engineering students designed more efficient neural processors. Physical therapists developed new rehabilitation protocols. And children like Marcus and Elena became consultants and advocates, helping other young patients navigate their own recovery journeys. 1 year after his surgery, Marcus Chen walked across the stage at his high school graduation. His gait was careful and deliberate. Supported by a sophisticated exoskeleton he'd helped design. But he walked under his own neural control. Elena Santos was accepted to Stanford's marine biology program with a full scholarship, becoming the youngest student in the university's history. Her admissions essay about designing adaptive technologies for underwater exploration had moved the review committee to tears. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story. David Santos became the director of Neurodyne's new Pediatric Neural Recovery Center, overseeing treatment programs for hundreds of children worldwide. He never returned to maintenance work, but he kept his old janitor's uniform in his office as a reminder that the most important discoveries often come from the most unexpected places. And Victoria Chen learned that sometimes the greatest success comes not from controlling breakthrough technology, but from setting it free to help as many people as possible. But the real transformation wasn't in the medical advances or the corporate decisions. It was in a moment that occurred 6 months after Elena's surgery, when Victoria walked into the rehabilitation center and found Marcus and Elena working with a newly paralyzed 8-year-old boy named Tyler. They were showing him the virtual reality swimming program, explaining how the neural bypass procedure worked, and most importantly, demonstrating that being paralyzed wasn't the end of possibility. It was just a different kind of beginning. "Tyler," Elena was saying, "you know what the coolest thing about dolphins is? They don't need legs to be amazing. They just need to believe they can fly through the water." Marcus nodded. "And the coolest thing about neural bypass surgery is that it doesn't make you normal, it makes you extraordinary." Victoria stood in the doorway, watching her son and his best friend give a frightened child the gift they'd once given each other: hope. Because sometimes, the word that changes everything isn't whispered by a doctor or a scientist. Sometimes it's spoken by a child who refuses to believe that impossible means forever. And sometimes that one word, possible, is enough to change not just one life, but thousands of lives around the world. The neural bypass technology that began with a janitor's desperate love for his daughter and a CEO's fierce determination to save her son became a symbol of what's achievable when people refuse to accept limitations. But more than that, it became proof that the most powerful force in medicine isn't technology or money or expertise. It's hope, shared between people who dare to believe that tomorrow can be different from today. And in the end, that's the only word that really matters: tomorrow.